Thanks for joining and welcome back. Your eyes don't deceive you. This week I am not doing an update on my bins myself. I had to have my handyman Dave come in and do the work in the bins for me as I was under the weather. So he's going to be doing the update and I'm doing the voiceover. So starting with my Vermi tote. These are the totes that have no holes at the bottom and currently have the mosquito netting and the cheesecloth at the top. These bins I am preparing to go through the harvest with them, or really the migration where I use the bait trays. So I'm not feeding these bins, just making sure the moisture content is okay. Some people refer to this as the starvation mode or the foraging mode. I prefer to say foraging, as starvation sounds pretty cruel. There's one of my worm friends there. The worms are looking pretty good. The castings are looking good. So for another week, I am just going to have the grit sprinkled over the top and move on to the next bin in the roster. And moving over to the second regular tote. Now with this one, it had mosquito netting on it and the bubble wrap was tucked to the top. Weren't many worms in the bubble wrap, and as you can see, it stayed a little more moist towards the area where the bubble wrap was. So again, this bin is in the foraging mode, hasn't been fed for a few weeks in preparation for harvest. There's a lot of material since I was trying to combat the moisture content over the summer, and that lingered through the fall since we had unusually high temperatures here in New Jersey. So the castings have dried up pretty well. The worms are looking good, and the cameraman Dave is just demonstrating the consistency of the castings here. So just as the first one, it will just get the grit added and then covered back up. Moving on to the Vermi bag totes. A lot of worms were hanging out on the bubble wrap, so cameraman Dave is taking the time to peel them off, even though he doesn't have to. But when you look at the top of this one, you can see that the top, it is quite moist. It doesn't have a dryness to it except for around the edges where the bubble wrap wasn't. Now the castings on this one looked really good. The worms are breaking down the contents. There's a big heap of worms towards the top, which you may not have noticed since my companion here is moving the material around quickly, but the worms look really good in both of the totes. So for these bins, they're just going to get fed up, watered down a little bit. As with the totes, I find that my castings dry out a lot around the edges. I don't want them dry. So again, some water, some food, grit, and that will update this bin. In the next week or two, I will be adding more material as I do want the level to come up higher. As a sidebar, it's so funny watching someone else do what I do week to week. Moving on to the second Vermi tote. Again, a lot of worms hanging out in the bubble wrap, which it's unnecessary to remove them from the bubble wrap. It's fine. Usually they're escaping to get air. But this one, the tote itself looked a lot wetter than its counterpart. I didn't notice in the top view any dryness around the edges. So this one really didn't need to get water, but it did get a spray of water before closing it up, and it also got a conservative portion of food and some grit added to it as well. It's the 5th bag, which is the Vermibag Mini. The Vermibag Mini is going to definitely get harvested next week. With this one, it does not go through a foraging or starvation phase, as it's a continuous flow through, so you just keep feeding the top. And there were plenty of worms in this instance that were up on the bubble wrap. Again, you don't need to remove them. But looking at the castings, there is a good bit of moisture in the castings at the top, and I cannot tell from this angle whether or not there were a bunch of worms that were at the top. So I'm going to hope that there were a bunch of worms at the top. But it looks like my companion here dug through the material pretty well, maybe a bit more than I would have personally when dealing with the flow-through system, but there's a good chunk of worms there, as you can see. So despite all the movement, the worms look happy in the castings. So with this one, they're going to get fed up, they're going to get grit and sprayed down as well. In the next upcoming week, since I do have to harvest 3 of the bins and do some sifting, there may be a difference in order of the videos. There may not be an actual update on the bins, and there may be more content available. So I hope you do join me. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed the content.